The perfect picture. The Johnsons seemed like the perfect family. Margaret, a corporate lawyer, and Edward, a successful entrepreneur, were the epitome of a hardworking couple. Their daughter, Olivia, 12, was quiet and reserved, often retreating into books or drawing. To outsiders, their lives appeared ideal, but cracks began to show. Margaret's relentless work hours and Edward's frequent business trips left Olivia lonely, with little more than a weekly family dinner to connect with her parents. The hustle of their careers left little time for meaningful conversations with their daughter. Olivia longed for her parents' attention, but she had learned to keep her struggles to herself. At school, Olivia faced a different battle. Her shy demeanor made her an easy target for bullies. They mocked her clothes, her quietness, and her drawings. Olivia endured it all in silence, hoping her parents would notice her sadness. But Margaret and Edward, consumed by deadlines and meetings, assumed her silence was just her personality. Unaware of her anguish, they continued their routines, believing their financial stability was enough to provide Olivia with a good life. Olivia dreaded mornings. School was a battlefield she navigated with trembling hands and a lowered gaze. Sophie, the ringleader of the bullies, delighted in tormenting her. Each day brought cruel pranks, whispered insults, and stolen belongings. The cafeteria became her refuge, where she could eat in solitude, hoping to avoid Sophie's jeers. Olivia's teachers noticed her withdrawn behavior, but dismissed it as shyness. One afternoon, Sophie tore Olivia's sketchbook, her sanctuary of expression. The jagged edges of the torn pages mirrored Olivia's breaking spirit. She rushed to the bathroom, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yet, she said nothing to her parents that evening. Margaret and Edward, preoccupied with their laptops and phones, missed the redness in her eyes and her unusually quiet demeanor. The silence in Olivia's world deepened, suffocating her cries for help. Olivia's bruises weren't visible, but the emotional scars grew deeper. Every joke, shove, and stolen lunchbox added weight to her fragile heart. One evening, Olivia attempted to tell her mother about her day. "Mom, something happened," she began, but Margaret, glancing at her phone, interrupted. "Can we talk later, sweetheart? I have a deadline." Defeated, Olivia retreated to her room, staring at her torn sketches. She began to believe no one would ever hear her. Meanwhile, Margaret and Edward discussed finances and upcoming projects, proud of the life they had built. Yet, neither noticed their daughter growing quieter each day. At school, her peers began spreading rumors about her, calling her weird. Olivia's refuge in her drawings became her sole escape, but even that couldn't shield her from the pain. One night, Olivia's father peeked into her room. She was hunched over her desk, a pencil sketching furiously. Edward smiled and thought, "She's so talented." He didn't notice her tear-streaked cheeks or how she quickly turned the page when he entered. "Good night, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair. "Good night, Dad," she whispered, wishing he'd ask about the drawing or stay longer. At school, Sophie's bullying escalated. She and her friends cornered Olivia in the locker room, laughing as they pushed her into the wall. That night, Olivia buried her face in her pillow, silent sobs shaking her small frame. The silence was deafening, a cry for help her parents couldn't hear. On a particularly difficult day, Olivia found her notebook defaced with cruel words. "Loser," "Nobody likes you," and "Go away." She fled to the bathroom, trembling as she clutched the notebook to her chest. When she returned home, her parents were both in the living room, chatting about work. For a moment, Olivia considered speaking up, but the fear of being dismissed held her back. Instead, she quietly climbed the stairs, sinking deeper into despair. Margaret noticed Olivia had stopped asking for hugs. Edward realized she no longer excitedly shared her school projects, but they attributed her behavior to growing up. "She's becoming independent," Margaret said with a smile. Edward nodded, unaware that Olivia wasn't growing independent, but isolated. Meanwhile, Olivia's classmates created a fake social media profile mocking her, sharing edited pictures and cruel captions. Olivia found the page late one night, tears blurring her vision. She felt completely alone, convinced her parents wouldn't understand. In an act of desperation, Olivia deliberately left her sketchbook open on the dining table, hoping her parents would notice the dark, sad drawings. But as Margaret grabbed her coffee and Edward reached for his car keys, neither paused long enough to look. Olivia clenched her fists, hurt and angry. That evening, she sat in her room, staring at the family photo on her desk, wondering if they even saw her. Olivia's grades began to drop. Teachers sent emails to her parents, but Margaret's inbox was flooded with work messages, and Edward often forgot to check his. During a parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Daniels, Olivia's homeroom teacher, mentioned her concerns. "She's withdrawn, and her grades are slipping," she said. Margaret nodded but quickly redirected the conversation to time constraints, promising to address the issue later. Olivia's 13th birthday came and went with little fanfare. Her parents bought her gifts, but they were impersonal. A new tablet from Edward, and a gift card from Margaret. There was no party, no friends, and no acknowledgement of her pain. That night, Olivia sat in the dark, staring at her tablet. The glowing screen reflected her tears as she scrolled through Sophie's fake account mocking her. Edward noticed Olivia's untouched dinner plates piling up in the sink. Margaret saw the once vibrant drawings turning darker, filled with images of stormy skies and lonely figures. Yet, their busy schedules always seemed to take precedence. Olivia's silence grew heavier, and her parents remained oblivious to the storm brewing in their daughter's heart. At school, Olivia's torment reached new heights. Sophie and her friends began recording their pranks and posting them online. Olivia's humiliation spread beyond the classroom walls, and she could feel the mocking gazes everywhere. One day she found herself locked in a supply closet by Sophie. Hours passed before a janitor found her trembling in the dark. At home, Margaret noticed Olivia flinching when she mentioned school. "Are you okay?" she asked, but Olivia merely nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. Edward brushed off her behavior, saying, "Kids are just moody at her age." They failed to see the fractures widening in her spirit. Mrs. Daniels couldn't ignore Olivia's spiraling behavior any longer. She scheduled a meeting with Margaret and Edward. "Olivia is struggling," she said, showing them drawings Olivia had submitted for a class project. Dark images of a lonely figure surrounded by shadows. "She may need help." Margaret and Edward exchanged uneasy glances, dismissing the concerns with excuses about work stress. They assured Mrs. Daniels they'd keep an eye on things. But their conversation on the car ride home quickly shifted back to business meetings and deadlines. A new student, Mia, noticed Olivia's loneliness and tried to reach out. "Want to sit together at lunch?" she asked with a warm smile. Olivia hesitated but agreed. For a brief moment, the world felt a little lighter. However, Sophie saw this budding friendship and made it her mission to destroy it. She began targeting Mia, warning her to stay away from Olivia or risk becoming the next victim. Mia reluctantly distanced herself, leaving Olivia feeling more abandoned than ever. Olivia started coming home later, wandering aimlessly to avoid school and home. She spent hours in the library, losing herself in books and sketching in notebooks she hid from her parents. Edward noticed her absence but assumed it was due to extracurricular activities. Margaret finally tried to engage with Olivia over dinner. "How was school today?" she asked, but Olivia's curt response, "Fine," ended the conversation. Margaret sighed, unsure how to bridge the growing gap between them. One evening, Olivia overheard her parents arguing about money. The tension in the house suffocated her, amplifying her feelings of being a burden. She started skipping meals, the hunger a small comfort compared to the emotional emptiness she felt. Her once vivid drawings became stark and lifeless, filled with scribbles and shadows. At school, Sophie escalated her bullying, now openly humiliating Olivia in front of classmates. Despite the pain, Olivia wore a mask of indifference, concealing her inner turmoil. Late one night, Olivia sat on her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. "Why am I even here?" she whispered. The weight of loneliness and despair became unbearable. She began writing in her journal, pouring out every emotion she had buried. Tears smudged the ink, but the act of writing provided a brief release. Downstairs, Margaret and Edward sat in the living room, their laptops glowing. "Have you noticed Olivia seems different?" Edward asked hesitantly. Margaret shrugged. "It's just a phase." The morning started like any other, but something felt off. Olivia barely spoke, her eyes distant and hollow. At school, Sophie and her friends cornered her again. This time they shoved her to the ground, laughing as Olivia's books scattered across the hallway. "You're pathetic," Sophie sneered. Olivia walked away in silence, her mind swirling with thoughts of escape. That evening, she didn't come home on time, leaving her parents worried for the first time. "She'll show up," Edward assured Margaret, but doubt lingered in his voice. The call came late at night. Olivia had been found near the edge of a nearby bridge, sobbing uncontrollably. A concerned passerby had intervened and called the authorities. Margaret and Edward rushed to the hospital, where Olivia lay asleep, her fragile frame curled up on the bed. Seeing their daughter in such a state shattered their carefully constructed lives. Margaret broke down in tears, while Edward sat silently, guilt etched into his face. They realized the gravity of their neglect and vowed to make amends. The next morning, Olivia's parents sat by her bedside, waiting for her to wake up. When she opened her eyes, she looked away, ashamed. Margaret reached for her hand, tears streaming down her face. "We're so sorry, Olivia," she whispered. Olivia hesitated, then whispered back, "I just wanted you to notice." Her words pierced their hearts, forcing them to confront the reality of their choices. They promised to be there for her no matter what,